Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chairman, it's an interesting point that keeps being made in the Christchurch press when you look at the average house price in Canterbury for this year, going in the last 4 months being increased by about 2.6% to $482,000. Now, other speakers have commented in respect of the degree of affordability of that, but the point that's made in respect of Christchurch, which the government may wish to take heed of, is that there has been a cooling and a slow reduction in the level of increase of average house prices across Christchurch and Canterbury, because as has been reported over and over and over again, we have a flurry and we will eventually, I suspect, if you look at forecasts, have a glut or a surplus of houses within the region. Hence, if you go back to good old school cert, fifth form economics, when supply exceeds demand, you have a stabilisation, if not a decrease, but even a slowing of an increase in house prices. The moral of that story for government members is you can achieve those economic goals by one thing: building more houses. It's an extremely simple proposition. It's one that I think has been debated, or is debated, every night on the news, every day on the radio, and commented upon every day in the newspapers. But it's something I think that there's some sort of mental blockage in respect of the government or the Minister for Housing in respect of this point. The only way you're going to deal with the housing crisis right through the country, but especially Auckland, is to build more houses. Issuing of consents, issuing of compliances, those things in themselves, or as we've heard, sort of special housing areas, don't put a roof over people's head, certainly not in the short term. And the evidence in Christchurch, and the evidence that's flowing through this bill, is that the flurry of building or excessive building activity that's happened has actually cooled those house prices to some extent. The question's well made by speakers, though, as to whether 450,000, when an average house price is 482 on latest figures, is affordable for many folks, many of whom have been through the earthquake crisis and are trying to, still many of them, reconstruct their lives and move into new housing. Sir, I want to look at on that point, look at the regulatory impact statement, page 3, paragraph 18, 17 and 18, which talks about this very point and notes that just 5% of new supply historically, or nationally I should say, is targeted, that is housing, is targeted at the lower quartile. Now, one of the bonuses with this project is that the targeting in the lower quartile of affordable homes is around 30%, which is pretty positive given the 5% figure nationally. And it's worth congratulating, I think, as I said in the first contribution on this bill, the Riccarton Racing Club and those members who brought this proposition to the House. Because as I said in my first contribution, this was not a proposition which found its genesis on the government benches or in the cabinet room of this government. It was a proposition and an idea that found its genesis in the innovation of local community stakeholders, particularly the Riccarton Racing Club itself, and was brought to the government as a positive idea and positive contribution that will provide a substantial number of houses and affordable homes for those in Canterbury. But I've got to say, if you were to sort of look at the debate as it happened last week, I think, and subsequently, you would think, listening to government members, those who have spoken, that this was some sort of brainwave of Nick Smith's or some sort of innovative strategy launched by the Crown. It wasn't, and credit should go where credit is due. And as other speakers have said and have referenced, particularly the previous speaker, in respect of infrastructure clause 9 part C, clause 9 point C, the requirements that the scheme contain its own infrastructure in respect of the development, it is silent, and government members have been silent. I'm sure the Minister for Local Government and the Chair will be interested in this point, as he is wont to to focus very heavily on local authorities and, Mr Chair,
Honourable Clayton Crossgrove.
and the needs of local communities, that there has been relative silence around the infrastructure requirements that will be required in this part of Christchurch. As I said in my last contribution, I spent the early years of my life one block away across the road, across Yaldhurst Road, from the Riccarton Racecourse. In those days, it was a pretty sleepy area. You know, Yaldhurst Road, you'd struggle to get a traffic jam on. Getting to Hornby was relatively easy. Going down Johns Road to the airport or heading to Belfast was a pretty simple proposition. That is no longer so. Not simply because in the Johns Road area roading is being, the four laning is happening, but simply because of the quantum of traffic, the industrial developments that have happened in Hornby that have necessitated further traffic. So it cannot be the case, as other speakers have said, that you plonk 600 houses in a residential area and nothing changes. Of course there will be changes, there will be issues around congestion, there will be issues around traffic flow, there will be issues for that local community. There are very small roads and small access ways around by the Racecourse Hotel and the little businesses that are there, going in and accessing through to Hornby. These are needs that will have to be dealt with, not only by the local and regional authority, but also, I would hope, with the assistance of government. And it would be helpful if the Minister and the Chair through, and I'm pleased he is in the Chair given his portfolios, could perhaps assist us with the aid of his officials in giving us some assurance as to what infrastructural support the government will provide around this project. Because what you've got here is a very positive project, genesis in the local community, the Riccarton Racing Club brought to the Parliament giving it the stamp of approval, and the government then generally being silent, apart from trying to take the credit for many of the proposals in this legislation, silent on what its contribution may or may not be. That area right through Avonhead, through Merrin, right out, as I say, to Johns Road, going right up to Church Corner, that whole area will be impacted by, what is it, about 2.5 people on average per house, according to the sort of official statistics. So you're looking at in excess, you're looking at a couple of thousand people, in theory, in that concentrated area. A very good proposal, something that I think the Parliament should be proud of, that local folks and local stakeholders have put a lot of time and effort into this and brought it to the Parliament, but that project will need support. And I would hope that Minister Brownlee and other ministers, the Housing Minister, Transport Minister, other ministers are engaged with this very heavily so that we don't end up getting a really nice property development that meets the multiple needs, including housing affordability needs. And unfortunately, that then has a knock-on effect through the local community because infrastructure doesn't follow development. That government commitment doesn't follow that development. So the local folks are doing their bit. They have consulted widely. Other colleagues have talked about the concern that there was initially, and I'm sure there are some residual concerns from many stakeholders in the community. But I know, having talked to many folks in that area, that it is the infrastructure issues that are of deep concern to them. I think many of the issues around the development itself have been put to bed, but what is the knock-on effect for that local community? So I would ask the Minister if he would mind taking a call perhaps, or seeking some advice from his officials, or perhaps over the dinner break having a quick word to Minister Nick Smith and the other ministers, or whoever's going to be in the chair following the dinner break, sir, and perhaps seek some advice to allay some of those concerns that people have raised. The Riccarton Racing Club and that piece of dirt is an iconic piece, an iconic institution in Christchurch. And it has been the scene, as other speakers have said, of some wonderful events, not just fantastic race days for the community, but it has been, its facilities have been the focal point, and its grounds have been the focal point for a large number of community activities right through the year, none least of which, of course, or none more successful, I suppose, than the Riccarton Market, which has become a real focus a real focal point, not just for those who run the market and those who produce goods and services, but for the community as a whole.
The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
I'm delighted to have one